Welcome to Curious Conversations, where we explore the power of curiosity and philanthropy. I'm Marianne Fernandez, founder of the Curious Philanthropist, an organization that helps people dream big about the positive impact they can make in the world. With our special guests, we'll be exploring how asking curious questions can lead to deeper impact and meaningful change. Today's guest is Dien Yuen, founder and CEO of Daylight, a learning partner equipping wealth and philanthropic advisors with confidence, competence, and cultural dexterity to grow their practices, strengthen client relationships, and lead with impact. Daylight Certified Impact Philanthropy Advisor Program and certificate offerings establish a new benchmark for excellence in philanthropic planning education. Their bold goal is to put 10,000 advisors through their training program by 2030. Dien also serves as the lead faculty for philanthropy at Singapore's Wealth Management Institute, where she was instrumental in launching Asia's first professional philanthropic certification program. She was named wealthmanagement.com's 10 to watch innovators and influencers set to change the industry in 2025 and inducted into the 2023 National Association of Charitable Gift Planners Hall of Fame. Previously, Dien founded the Center for Philanthropy and Social Impact at the American College for Financial Services, where she developed and taught courses in the Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy program. Dien's early career included senior roles in wealth management and global development organizations. So I've known Dien for several decades now. She might be one of the most curious people that I know, always wondering if something could be done better or open to understanding a different perspective. And she's not afraid to hold space for a question where there is no clear answer yet. As Daylight is poised to further professionalize philanthropic planning, she's the perfect guest for a conversation on curiosity and the advisor. Hi, Dien.
Good morning.
I am so excited to have this conversation with you because I've been mulling over the role of curiosity and the advisor. So let's get started. I wanted to ask you about the impetus for starting Daylight Advisors. Like, what were you curious about?
Uh, Part of the reason why we started Daylight was the global piece and the modern family piece. We see a lot of work that's already out there. The American College with the CAP program has done amazing things. 2164 is out there, very respected work out there. But I was doing a lot of teaching overseas in Singapore. And then, my background, right? So I grew up I was born in Vietnam. I'm Chinese. I grew up in Michigan. And just being able to watch how families are a little bit different. And the dynamics that are within those families, especially the cultural nuances as well, and the generational differences. I started wondering, the curiosity part came out in me was how are we teaching advisors how to work with these families? What's missing in the field, right? And then do we just add on what's currently out there, or do we have to think about a new approach to this? So that's how Daylight started, was this curiosity of what can we do to meet where the market is?
Wow. And I know you have a target of
Yes.
trying to reach out to and continue to professionalize a number of philanthropic advisors.
Yeah, our goal is 10,000 advisors.
Wow.
By 2030. We want to try and reach 10,000 advisors. And part of the goal there, again, it's a curiosity piece as well, because we were wondering what is that tipping point, right? How many advisors do we have to reach in a way to, I want to say, convert or evangelize, but really like bring them into this fold of every single client that I'm going to have, I will make sure I will have that philanthropic conversation with them. And right now, they know it's good for business, right? It's good for business, changing demographics. We have the great wealth transfer that's happening. So the clients are a little bit different now, even for the wealth advisors. But then also, if we hit that 10,000 number, then it becomes a tipping point where everyone is talking about it. And eventually, could that be that professional responsibility line, right? So if you don't talk about it, then it becomes a professional liability for the firm and for you. It could be for business, but it could also be for other legal reasons as well, and risk.
So we're
So
not just talking about philanthropic advisors, you're talking about just general financial services
yes,
advisors as well.
I would
Exciting.
say all the advisors that can influence the client decision, right? On philanthropic planning as well as wealth management decisions. So we work with philanthropy advisors, financial advisors, estate planning and tax attorneys, CPAs. So anyone that touches that planning piece for the client. And it could be your everyday kind of client, an everyday neighbor next door, or it could be the high net worth and ultra high net worth families. So the goal is, could we train advisors, no matter where they work in that spectrum of clients, to talk about philanthropy and to talk about philanthropy in a way that makes sense for the market and the audience that they're working with, right?
I love this. I love this. And so today in our conversation, I know we'll probably skew towards more philanthropic advisors, but I think any advisor listening could take a few really fantastic nuggets out of this. So as you know, as advisors in general, we're often expected to have the answers and usually pretty quickly. So I personally believe that part of our role as advisors is to broaden the universe of opportunities for our clients. Even if it's not quite for them, at least they're aware of other perspectives, other approaches, just even in the landscape of what they're considering. So, how can curiosity help shift the dynamic from expertise to exploration? And why does that matter in philanthropic advising?
Mm, that's a great question, Marianne. And I think it really gets to the piece of the purpose of philanthropy, right? Which is always starting out with your values, right? So even to get to the values, like what do clients care about, you have to be curious and ask those questions. And you have to also follow up. Right. To me, I see it's like a cascade of questions of knowing when to ask and what to ask after that. But the client or the donor might come to you and say, I have this plan in mind already. I know exactly what I want to do. Great, right? It's a great place to start. And then I think the next step is asking, how did you come to this? Like, what drove you to come up with this plan, right? And if the plan was so great, like, why are you talking to me right now? You can implement it, or do you need someone to implement it for you? And if somebody implements it for you, are you willing to also have that conversation about it might look a little bit different, right? So I always think, the clients or the donors come in to the office thinking they have a plan, they're actually asking for permission, saying, what else is out there? I need you, the expert, to tell me what else is out there and what I'm missing. But they're not very vocal about that. So I think we just have to look for cues, right, in the conversation, and then look for openings as well. The good advisors always watch the client and understand when they can come in, right, and just push a little bit more, or when they need to back off, right, and maybe another time. So I think it is also part of our responsibility, actually, because part of our work as advisors is to educate and inform. And even though they might know exactly what they want to do, we need to help them expand and open a little bit that doorway, right? We have to educate them. Have you thought about this? What about this? Right? If we put these things in place, we're also going to run into these three issues. Let's talk about those three issues. So I think there's lots of opportunities to expand that thinking. But it does take a little bit, I would say, experience and a little bit of wisdom in this work. And then for the advisor themselves, learning really just what you're trying to teach, how to be curious and how to position and ask those questions to the client.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I feel like as an advisor, and again, this is my opinion, is that clients might come to you with a worldview like this. And our goal is to help them have a view like this,
Mhm.
even if what they choose ends up, falling into this.
Yes. Or Marianne, maybe we take this and flip it this way, right? Here's a different perspective. And
Yeah.
maybe this is what your kids are asking
Yeah.
you to do as well. right?
Yeah.
And the world is changing, things are constantly evolving. And so the way we're always looking at this might not, this very, very like, not rigid, but I grew up with all these experiences, I've learned all of these lessons, I've put this together and here's my plan. That's wonderful. But the world is still going to continue to evolve and change. How do we adapt to that? Right.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for that answer. So, can you share a moment when that well-timed question, rooted in just curiosity, transformed a client conversation or decision?
Hmm. This was back in my younger days when I was still trying to make my way in Asia. I had started a philanthropic consulting firm. It was an advising firm at that time, right? It was still consulting. Um, and it was my first major client. A bank had brought me in to work with this gentleman. He was in the process of selling his business. He's in his late 80s, but he just wouldn't sign the documents, Marianne. And the bankers are baffled. Everything's in place. It's a beautiful plan, right? Technically, it's a beautiful plan. The family's behind all this, but he just couldn't sign it. And so they sent me to his villa, which is in Bali, which I was not complaining, happy to go. And I spent 2 days with him just documenting his journey, growing up poor, how he made his way into this business, the failures he's had in his life because of the business, and then what it meant to him. And the reason he couldn't let it go was because that business was his life, right? If he signed it over and sold it, what happens to his life? And of course, he's nearing this age where he's thinking really hard about legacy and being Buddhist, it's like, what does that mean? Right. And can I sit comfortably with this and also making sure my family's taken care of? And so we just documented his journey and then sent him the summary afterwards, very happy with it. And then he signed the documents. And I don't want to take credit for it, but I think in that 2 days with him, just allowing him to sit and process and talk was very, very helpful. And I think the question that, was turning point was in most Chinese families, the oldest son has to take over the business, right? And he was really worried about his oldest son. If he's forced to take over the business, and because if he doesn't sell it, the son has to take over the business. But the son has no interest in the business. What does this mean for his son's life? Right. And so that, the question I asked him was, what did you want to do that your parents never allowed you to do? Right. And that got him down to thinking about, what about my son's life? Am I responsible for that? And so, yes, he signed the documents. The business was partially sold, and then the rest he was able to keep, for the children as a continuing kind of income. My thing what was brilliant about this was we did create a foundation out of that. And in every single board meeting for that family, there's always, and I'm so proud of this because it's my paragraph. I actually wrote this 2 paragraph, like a very short summary about what his wishes are, right? And it was brilliant because he was very, very adamant. I don't want it to be a statement. I want it to be a wish, right? So that he's not controlling the family and the future generations. So I think that, understanding the cultural nuances will help you figure out what question to ask. And I think if I didn't have kind of my Chinese heritage, my background, I wouldn't have asked that question of knowing most families, oldest son, you have to take over the business and care for the family, right? So, and it didn't really register on me because I was like, well, what's the problem, right? And we're like, how do we figure this out? What question should I ask him? And so it just kind of came out, I think, because of the cultural background and training I've had. So I don't know if that helps, Miriam, but I think it's
And it,
just questions are really, really important, right? Especially for certain cultures when, especially the more quiet ones that are not encouraged to be open, right?
yes, yes, and so two comments. One, I think that we often don't give people enough time for reflection because a lot of times it feels like, okay, hired the consultant, let's sign the documents, let's move things forward. But I think one of the pieces that we miss is that everybody's philanthropic journey or even life journey is different. So at some point, sometimes you need to start with, let's talk about values. But in a case like this, they're not used to talking about things like that. They're not used to being that open. So maybe you got to take a step back and help him talk through his journey. So I
Yes.
think that that's kind of what I think is nuanced about the work that we do is when we say we meet people where they are, it really means meet them where they are. Sometimes it doesn't start with a process that we're all used to, which is values. Then you
Mhm.
come up with the mission statement, then you come up
Yeah.
with, a strategy. That's great. And I think we rush some of that. We don't give them that time for reflection.
Yeah.
So thank you for sort of reinforcing that. I think it's great. And I think the cultural nuances is fantastic as well because there are certain things that are in different cultures, here in the US and in other places. It's not what you would expect. And I think
Yes.
yeah.
And also just even the generational differences as well, right? So in the US, we have how some business or how you approach things in the East Coast and West Coast is very different than the Midwest. But now we have what, 4 or 5 generations, right? In a family office sometimes. And so being able to speak to the different generations and the communication styles, right, is very different. Like me talking and interviewing a 14-year-old is going to be very different than me talking to the 85-year-old in the family. Right.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So my next question is, so how can advisors intentionally cultivate this curiosity, not just as a personality trait, but really as a practice when you're working with clients? So in their daily work with clients and possibly other collaborators, how do we intentionally cultivate this as a practice?
Uh, I think advisors already do this, Marianne, but they're not aware that they're doing it. And I think if they're aware of it, they can actually learn to perfect it a little bit more and take it to the next level. And I see that to be a successful advisor, you either have to love the technical piece or you have to love people, right? Because you're dealing with both as well, and you're good at some things and maybe not good at others. And you can always bring people in, but I would say in the mornings for me, I wake up really early, and I do a lot of reading. And the reason I do that reading is because I'm trying to figure out one, how can I incorporate more practices in our work to teach advisors or create case studies? And even though people say, oh, it's a case study, well, there's many different ways to create case studies, right? It could be a note card, it could be a full case study, it could be 10 pages, or it could be just half a page. And so I'm always curious about how other kind of fields, right? It could be manufacturing, tech, it could be other, how do other people train? And so could we also take some of that into our training with advisors, especially in technology nowadays? And then I would say the other way that advisors are already doing this is they're constantly thinking about how to build their business, but they're also thinking about what else can I do to support this client because I don't want to lose them. How do I retain that? And how do I grow my relationship with them? Right. So they're always thinking about this. And people will say, oh, but they're doing it because of the AUM or because of the fee. Yes, but they're also trying to grow the business because they want the stickiness of the relationship. Right. And so advisors will constantly think about ways like, how do I deeply engage this client? How can I do more for the client? How can I be there for that client and for their future generations as well? So I think the advisors are thinking about this already, but they just haven't really been aware of, but there are other ways I could ask these questions. And it's not really about creating another charitable trust. It's not about creating another family trust for them, right? But it's really thinking about what else outside of these technical tools can we help the family with? Um, and I think that best advisors ask those questions because we're always looking for assets that are not leveraged, right? In the plan. And so you start asking questions like, where do you vacation? Like, where do you go? And they're like, oh, we used to go here, but now we don't use this vacation home anymore. Great, another planning opportunity, right? So I think every single day when we think about questions we can ask our clients in building that relationship deeper, yes, it could be a business opportunity, but it also could be what else can we help the client with in leveraging, like not just the assets as intangible assets like the vacation home, but also their other capitals, right? We talked about their social capital, right? Intellectual capital. How can we also leverage that so our clients, as the ultra high net worth families would say, how do we help our families flourish?
Yeah.
Right. And so advisors have that responsibility, I think, to not only look on the wealth and the planning side, but also to look at the other capitals of how can we really make our clients be happy, right, and flourish in this work.
That's that's fantastic. And so I have a follow-on question to that. So so you said advisors do a lot of this naturally. They're already asking these questions. Maybe they haven't framed it as a curious question or curiosity. It's more framed in how do we hold on to or attract more business. But how can advisors craft sort of curious questions to get to the heart of the why
Mm.
of their clients, the giving, the purpose? So, how do advisors devise these questions that would help them have this deeper conversation?
Yeah, that is also art and the science to this, right? And it goes back to just having some experience, and for the advisors, some confidence in asking these questions. Um, so before you any advisor can put together a brilliant plan, right, for any client, and that's my true belief. Like if you're competent enough, you will be able to figure out a plan for your client. I think the problem is the plan might be a little bit too cookie cutter, right? And then what we have to also be aware of as an advisor, especially a philanthropy advisor, we hear a story and we assume here's what the plan looks like because in my other client situation, this is what it is, right? So we make assumptions and we plan accordingly to that. So I think we have to stop ourselves, right, as advisors and say, is this truly for this particular client? And then getting to the why, the outcome might be the same, but the purpose and the reason might be different, right? So I think, we have to craft questions and it's an art, right? Trying to craft these questions. You can ask a question 50 different ways. But I also believe if you can't ask a question 3 or 4 different ways, you really don't understand what you're asking, right? And
Interesting.
so I think if you could write down 3 or 4 questions that you can ask different ways of trying to get to the why. And then I think it's also important, like we were talking about asking the cascading questions that come after that. You have to be prepared. So imagine like this waterfall, right? Coming down, like, and so it's like water just kind of, here's your first question, here's another question, and the water keeps coming down. You just keep asking the questions to really get to now the client understands, I understand as an advisor. And it takes art and it takes confidence. And in some situations, we're trained not to ask questions that are too probing, right? Too personal, because most advisors don't want to open that floodgate, right, of what comes after that. And then you will end up learning a lot about this individual and a lot of their what things in the closet, right? No one else will know. And there's then that also the responsibility for you as an advisor. How do you hold this information as
Yeah.
well? So we talk about a lot about, I think, helping our clients kind of go through this kind of mental awareness and mental health, but we rarely talk about the advisor's mental health as well, because we end up holding a lot of our clients, I would say, issues, their dreams and their fears, right? And things that they've done in the past. So we're holding it as an advisor. So we also have to take care, I think, of ourselves a little bit. But that also helps us ask those questions that are really
Yeah.
deep and personal.
Yeah. And I think, I always feel like being an advisor to individuals and families and talking to them even about their philanthropy, that's a very honored place that they
Yes,
have put you in. They
yes.
they share their stories, they share their aspirations, they share what's gone in the past, what went well, what didn't go well. And sometimes it's the conversations in between. You know, when we're walking to do site visits, for example, in Africa, we're, off conversation just about their dreams and hopes for their kids
Hmm.
that we never had the opportunity to talk about before, but now that's coming out. And so I think you're right. It's really important that we realize that it is quite a responsibility, and to sort of hold these dreams, aspirations, objectives for our clients. I think
Yeah,
that's
and Marion, you pointed out like to if you want to be really curious and really help this client, spend the time with them. Like you were talking about this trip to, like going with them to site visits in Africa. I have spent a lot of time with our clients and then previously to like we took them on, I would say like journeys, right? Like of learning the community, learning what the issues are, and like hearing and understanding like you have to take a plane, a train, cross a bridge where they put two planks of wood across, and 3 days later, then you actually get to meet the
yeah,
grantee, right? But during that time with the client, that's when that relationship happens where you could ask almost a lot of probing questions that you cannot ask sitting in an office.
yeah,
The
yeah,
environment is so important. So if
yeah.
you really truly want to understand your client, get out of the office, right?
I agree with that. I agree with that. And it's funny because I had learned something from Orland Bishop, which some people who are listening might know. And he talked about a change of place when I
Yes.
talked about these philanthropic trips, a change of place. Because if you're, say, at home in surroundings where you normally are, it might sometimes keep you stuck in the way that you're thinking. But if you do step out, and I'm talking in a different neighborhood, across the city, across the country, or even across the world, all of a sudden the surroundings signal you to think differently. It allows you, it gives you permission to say, Marianne in Florida acts like this, but Marianne in Africa thinks differently. I ask good questions. I share some of my aspirations. And I think that's the power of, again, stepping out of just our normal surroundings, go visit places. And it's that great opportunity to have those conversations.
Yeah,
Um,
and Marion, it doesn't even have to be like going out to a different spot. It could be just also a simple change. For example, in my first class, trying to teach private bankers in Singapore, it was so difficult. Like 2 hours in, I couldn't even get them to answer like what brings you joy, right? It was so hard, and to get them to talk to each other. And then we took a break and I put a coat rack on the outside of the door and I said, okay, everybody just take the jackets off and put it there, right? They did. And then when they came back in, the environment was so different, right? They started
I love
talking to each
that.
other. And so my lesson learned is now when I teach and when I bring advisors together, it's always casual. Like, do not wear a suit. Right? If they come casual, they're ready to talk, they're ready to work, and they're ready to kind of practice, right? Because I truly believe if advisors don't go through this process of a values exercise and exploration and curiosity of their own, like what drives me? Why am I here? Like if you don't do it yourself, you cannot help the client, right?
Yeah.
So that's why part of the training for these advisors, my lesson learned has always been always being aware of how we dress, right? What's the environment we are in? Is it too bright, right? Even are we putting people in classroom style versus more huddle style? So I think all these are little differences that clients are aware of as well, and that advisors can easily implement.
I think that's great. I love these sort of simple little tweaks
Mhm.
that make all the difference. It's almost like if you don't come in a suit, you're taking off an armor that
Yes,
you have,
yes,
signals to you to act in a certain way. So I love the signals that we've been talking about that keep people in a very narrow lane of what they
yes.
talk about, what they do, how they think about themselves, how they think about the possibilities. So I love that idea.
It's
And
identity, right? Because
yeah,
we have multiple identities every single day that we are bringing in, and so you could tell them like, if you could shed this identity in for a day, what else is underneath that, right? And so being like, again, advisors being curious, like, what is underneath that suit?
Yeah, yeah, and I actually posed a question because there are some questions I use in my practice with clients, just to more casually help them start to reflect and think. So, what do you love? What makes you angry? What needs to stop or change now? What are you curious about? And what's part of your story? And it's funny, I shared this with a couple of lawyers in New York, and I said, take those questions, walk down the street or on your normal commute to the city to come to work. What comes up for you? And one of them said, I could walk down the street and I could think of 50 things regarding those questions. And I think helping them to have a small taste of that their own journey around
Mhm.
giving and philanthropy or what they want to change, I think helps them really see it in a small way from the client's perspective about the
Mhm.
way they, want to, the way they think about creating positive change in the world and how they choose something that really means something to them.
Yes.
So any last words for our listeners?
Yeah, it's curiosity brings up all sorts of, I would say, interesting themes, right? It could be curious, like questions. It could be also just the way you might present a plan to a client. It could also be, how you frame questions, like working with different generations and different cultural nuances as well in settings. But I think it all comes back down to what am I trying to do with this client? Right. So I think there are opportunities where you could push the client a little bit more with their thinking, like how we started our conversation, by just creating a safe space for them, giving them permission to be who they are, shed all those identities that were kind of thrust upon them, but also, giving them that safer environment to talk about anything they want to talk about and not constantly looking at your clock and saying, we're doing this by the hour. Right. So I think as advisors, we have to be very, very careful of how even, we're the vases in the room, right? And all the settings, but also how we present ourselves. And then I think it's really important to also see it as a long-term relationship. If you come and seeing like this is only like a one-time project relationship, I think it's a detriment to everyone. But lifelong learning journey is what we always talk about at Daylight here. So thank you.
Exactly, for advisors, but also for clients. This is
Mhm,
journey. Awesome.
mhm.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, Marianne.
Wow. There were so many gems in my conversation with Dien. So here are just a few that stuck with me. So one, go beyond the technical. Want to build deeper, lasting relationships with your clients? Ask yourself, what would truly help this person or family flourish? That means stepping outside the office, learning to ask better questions, and creating space for real reflection, not just about money, but also about life. Two, be a guide, not just a planner. Whether a client arrives with a blank slate or a detailed plan, they're often really asking, what else is possible? So your role is to educate, inform, and yes, inspire. Three, culture matters. So cultural nuance doesn't just come from global backgrounds. It can show up within regions in our own country, between generations, or even professions. Good advisors pay attention to those subtle but powerful differences. And lastly, reimagine your role. So whether you're the advisor or the client, give yourself permission to think differently. Sometimes that means getting out of your routine, whether it's a change of place or simply shedding the armor we wear every day.